You remember last Monday I talked to you about the three realms of prayer. The first realm is the asking realm. The second is the seeking realm, and the third is the knocking realm. And God gave us in the tabernacle of Moses, what is called the tabernacle of Moses in the wilderness, a pattern into his presence. We entered into the presence of Jesus, and there are no shortcuts. We all begin in the outer court. And in the tabernacle we had the outer court, in which the altar of sacrifice, and then the laver next to it, and that was in the outer area. Then as you looked straight ahead, you saw a tent, which is called the tabernacle. And the tabernacle was split into two. The first was called the holy place, and the second was called the Holy of Holies, separated with a veil, a curtain called the veil. There was a curtain that you had to go through to enter into the holy place, and there was a second veil, a second curtain called the veil, that the high priest would go only into that area once a year. So three realms, three worlds. The first world is the outer court, where stood the altar of sacrifice and where stood the laver. The altar of sacrifice was the place where they would sacrifice the offerings they offered to God. The blood was shed. The altar of sacrifice is that place where animals were killed and died for the sins of Israel. And then beyond that, a few feet beyond that, was a laver, looked like a big cup and saucer, made from brass that women used for glass. And it was filled with water. And the priests, before entering into the holy place to minister, had to wash hands and feet in that laver. That entire area is the first realm of prayer, where you and I experience, and you and I experience it every day. No one can enter into the Holy of Holies without going through first the outer court area, the realm we call the asking realm of prayer. And nobody can get into the Holy of Holies without entering into the second realm, which is called the seeking realm. Now, in the seeking realm, in the second realm, in the actual tabernacle, and I would call that the first part of the tabernacle, the actual tent. Now you're inside the tent. You just went through the door. It was called the door. It was still a curtain, but they called it the door, hung on 5 poles. And when you'd go in, to your left stood a lampstand. To your right stood a table with 12 loaves of bread on it, frankincense spread upon the bread. And straight ahead stood a square table with a crown, what looked like a crown on it, again covered with gold. All the lampstand and the table of showbread, it was called, were covered with gold. And there stood in front of you also a golden altar of incense. In the outer court outside, there was no gold. In the outer court, there was brass. The altar of sacrifice and the laver were covered with brass. The gold was found only in the tabernacle, not in the outer court. So as you came in, there was the lampstand, golden lampstand. There was a table called the table of showbread with 12 loaves of bread, fresh brought in every day, spread with frankincense. And there stood a golden altar of incense. That's the second realm of prayer. That's the second place that the priest would enter into for ministry. And that is also our place of seeking the Lord, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then you entered into the Holy of Holies, where stood the Ark of the Covenant. And there it was a very small space, much smaller than the first portion of the tabernacle. And there stood the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark was covered with a mercy seat. It was called basically the cover of the Ark. And on this mercy seat, it looked like a square crown, long square crown. 2 cherubs were on top, their wings nearly touching each other as they bowed, looking at the mercy seat. Now, that is the most holy place. I want to repeat, because I think it's important we all understand that God's will for us and God's desire is that we fellowship with Him daily in the Holy of Holies. When we do not, our lives will wither away. The reason Christians cannot experience the abundance of God's presence is because they neglect the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is our destination daily. Daily. But we all must begin in the outer court, where there's brass. There's no divinity. There's no presence of God out there. There are sacrifices that must be made out there. The Word of God must cleanse us and purify our minds out there. And like I said last Monday, that is the place where we come into the presence of God. We enter into His court, but not yet into His presence. We enter into His court, and that first realm is where the flesh is still in control. This is where our minds will wander. This is where our stomach will get hungry. This is where distraction is a reality. This is where we repeat ourselves with forgive me and bless me and keep me and bless my mother, my father, and my family. That's the realm of repetition. It's also there the enemy can still attack you. It's still there he can attack your mind. It's still there where corrupt thoughts can occupy your mind. You can actually be in the outer court with corrupt thoughts attacking your own mind. This is where the flesh must be crucified. You cannot crucify the flesh in the holy place. It has to be crucified outside. Death, it's the place of the, remember, the altar of sacrifice is outside. We have to lay our lives on the altar of sacrifice.